The official story was that I was fine. I repeated it to my mother on the phone, to my colleagues in the break room, to the concerned cashier at the corner store who saw me buying the same brand of instant noodles for the third time in a week. Just busy, I'd say, offering a smile that felt like cracking plaster. Working on a big project. The lie was a threadbare coat, but it was better than standing naked in the wind of their pity. The truth was, I wasn't fine. I was hollowed out, a building condemned from the inside. 6 months after Sarah had walked out, taking with her the good silverware, my favorite sweater, and 8 years of my life, the silence in my apartment had become a physical presence. It sat in the empty chair across from me at the dining table. It lay beside me in the vast, cold expanse of my queen-sized bed. I had sworn off love, sworn off women, sworn off the particular exquisite agony of letting another woman into the guarded corners of my heart, only to watch her redecorate and then leave, taking the floorboards with her. My life was now a carefully curated exhibition of solitude. Books were stacked in neat, unread towers. The thermostat was set to a brisk 65 degrees, just how I liked it. The only warmth came from the radiator's grudging hiss and the laptop on my lap. I was writing a dissertation on obscure 19th century poets who had all, rather fittingly, died alone. I wasn't looking for anyone. I wasn't looking for anything beyond the final page of my final chapter. The scent of my apartment was dust and Earl Grey tea. It was the smell of controlled, methodical loneliness. Then, one Tuesday, a new scent bulldozed its way in. Turpentine, damp earth, and something uniquely, infuriatingly Maya. She didn't knock. Maya never knocked. The door swung open and she was there, a whirlwind in a paint-splattered jumpsuit, her dark curls escaping a messy bun, a canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder that looked heavy enough to anchor a ship. "Emergency," she announced, her voice filling the sterile quiet of my living room. She dropped the bag on my floor with a heavy thud that rattled a stack of books. "My studio's main water pipe just reenacted the Trevi Fountain. Landlord says it'll be a week. Minimum." She stood there, hands on her hips, surveying my pristine, joyless space with the critical eye of an artist assessing a blank canvas. "So, you have a couch, and I have a week's worth of debt in the form of coffee and takeout. Roomy?" I just stared at her. Maya was my best friend, the one fixed point in the spinning chaos of my life since the implosion. She was the one who had shown up with trash bags and righteous fury the day after Sarah left, who had sat with me in silence when words were useless, who had patiently listened to the same 3 sad songs on repeat for a month straight. But having her here, in my sanctuary of solitude, felt like a violation. She was too alive, too vibrant. Her very presence was a reminder of a world outside my self-imposed exile, a world of color and noise and feeling that I wanted no part of. Her scent, that mix of oil paints and the sandalwood soap she used, was already clinging to the air, an olfactory invasion. It was the smell of life, and I had been subsisting on sterility. "A week?" I finally managed, the words stiff from disuse. She gave me a wry smile, a flash of warmth that I instinctively recoiled from. "Think of it as an artist's residency. I'll be quiet, moody. You won't even know I'm here." It was the biggest lie she'd ever told. The first 24 hours were a study in friction. Maya was not, it turned out, capable of being quiet or moody in a way that didn't involve taking up every inch of available space, both physical and psychic. She hummed while she made coffee, a low, tuneless sound that vibrated through the floorboards and into my bones. She left a half-finished mug on the bookshelf, a crimson lipstick print on its rim like a tiny, cheerful wound. In the morning, the bathroom, my sterile white box, was transformed. It smelled of her shampoo, something citrusy and green, and steam hung in the air like a ghost. A damp towel was slung over the shower door, and a bottle of her ridiculously expensive face oil sat next to my generic bar of soap. a silent judgment against my Spartan lifestyle. I found myself tidying up after her constantly, my movements sharp and irritated. I'd pick up the mug, wash it with unnecessary vigor, and place it back in the cupboard with a definitive clink. I'd refold her towel, lining up the edges perfectly. Each act was a small, silent protest against her intrusion. "You know," she said on the second evening, watching me wipe down a perfectly clean countertop she'd just leaned against. "For someone who studies romantic poets, you have the soul of an accountant." I didn't look at her. "It's called being tidy. You should try it. It's very calming." "It's called being terrified of a single speck of dust disrupting your perfect, miserable order," she countered. She wasn't being cruel. Maya was never cruel. She was just observant. It was the most annoying thing about her. She saw things I didn't want seen. She stood up from the couch, where she'd been sketching in a large, worn notebook, and walked over to me. She was wearing an old, oversized flannel shirt that I recognized as one of her brother's, and soft gray sweatpants. She looked comfortable, at home, in a way that made my own tense posture feel ridiculous. She reached out and gently took the dishcloth from my hand. Her fingers brushed against mine, and a jolt, hot and unwelcome, shot up my arm. It was the first casual touch I'd experienced from anyone in months that wasn't an accidental bump on the subway. Her skin was warm, the calluses on her fingertips a testament to the hours she spent shaping clay and stretching canvases. It was the touch of a creator, of someone who made things with her hands, and it felt alien against my own, which did little more than type and turn pages. "Chloe, stop," she said softly. Her voice was lower now, stripped of its usual teasing lilt. "The counter is clean enough to perform surgery on. Come sit down. Tell me what's really going on." "Nothing is going on," I snapped, pulling my hand back as if burned. "I'm working, you're camping. This is the arrangement. There's no subtext." Her dark eyes searched mine, and for a terrifying second, I felt utterly transparent. I felt her see past the tidiness and the dissertation and the carefully constructed walls, right into the hollow, echoing space Sarah had left behind. She saw the fear, the bitter, curdling fear that I would never be whole again, and the even greater fear that I might one day risk it all for another woman and be shattered a second time. It was a risk I refused to take. The first demolition had leveled me. A second would salt the earth. "Okay," she said, her gaze softening with something that looked dangerously like understanding. "No subtext." She held up her hands in surrender and went back to the couch. But the space between us was now charged with everything I had refused to say. My fortress had been breached, not by an army, but by a quiet question and a gentle touch. For the rest of the night, I could feel her presence, not as an irritation, but as a weight, a warmth, a silent challenge to the cold, orderly peace I had fought so hard to build. The air still smelled of her. And for the first time, I didn't entirely hate it. I hated myself for not hating it. I had survived Sarah by becoming a creature of habit and control. But Maya wasn't a habit. She was a disruption. A beautiful, chaotic, terrifying disruption. The forced proximity of our cohabitation began to work on me like water on stone. My apartment, once a silent tomb, was now filled with the small sounds of another person's existence. The scratch of her charcoal pencil against paper as she sketched late into the night. The soft thud of her bare feet on the hardwood floors in the morning. The quiet, contented sigh she made after her first sip of coffee. I found myself cataloging these sounds, these details, with the same obsessive focus I usually reserve for poetic scansion. It was a distraction, I told myself, a way to avoid the looming blank page of my own life. She was an early riser. I'd stumble out of my bedroom, drawn by the scent of brewing coffee, to find her already at the kitchen table, her sketchbook open, a smudge of charcoal on her cheek. The morning light from the window would catch in her dark curls, creating a halo effect that was both cliche and breathtakingly real. She'd look up and smile, a slow, sleepy smile that made my stomach do a complicated little flip. "Morning, sunshine," she'd murmur, her voice thick with sleep. "It's barely sunrise," I'd grumble, pouring myself a coffee and retreating to the furthest possible corner of the kitchen. But I was watching her. I couldn't stop. I watched the way her brow furrowed in concentration as she drew, her tongue poking out from the corner of her mouth just slightly. I watched the fluid, confident movements of her hands as she gesticulated, telling me a story about a frustrating client or a breakthrough she'd had on a new piece before the flood. Her hands were mesmerizing, strong, capable, flecked with paint in shades of ultramarine and burnt sienna that no amount of scrubbing could fully remove. They were hands that knew how to create, to mold, to build. My own hands felt flimsy and useless in comparison. One afternoon, I came home from a soul-crushing library session to find she had rearranged my living room. My severe minimalist couch was now softened with two large plush cushions she must have salvaged from her studio. A vibrant, richly textured throw blanket was draped over the armrest. On my sterile coffee table, a small clay pot held a cluster of wildflowers. The room was the same, but it was also completely different. It was warmer. It looked lived in. It looked like hers. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice tight with a confusing mix of indignation and a strange, unbidden sense of relief. "I committed an act of domestic terrorism," she said without looking up from her book. "I introduced color and comfort into a neutral zone. You can report me to the authorities." "It's just different." "It's better," she said, finally meeting my gaze. There was no apology in her eyes, only a steady confidence. "Your apartment looked like a waiting room for purgatory. Now it looks like a place where a person might actually want to live." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to tell her to put everything back, to respect the boundaries of my carefully curated misery. But I couldn't, because she was right. The wildflowers, a riot of purple and yellow, were painfully beautiful. The cushions did look inviting. I sank onto the couch, the new softness yielding beneath me, and pulled the throw blanket over my lap. It smelled faintly of her, of turpentine and sandalwood. I hated it. I loved it. My internal landscape was becoming a civil war, and I was losing ground. My fascination with her hands grew into a quiet obsession. I would watch them as she chopped vegetables for the dinner she insisted on cooking. The rhythmic, steady motion of the knife, a stark contrast to my own clumsy efforts. I watched them as she tucked a stray curl behind her ear, a simple, unconscious gesture that made my breath catch. I imagined what those hands would feel like, the rough calluses and the surprising softness of her palms. I imagined them on a block of clay, shaping it with effortless grace. Then, my traitorous mind would take a step further, and I'd imagine those hands on me, on my back, in my hair, on my face. The thought was a flash of heat, so intense and so forbidden that it left me dizzy. I would have to get up and leave the room, my heart hammering against my ribs, leaving Maya looking after me with a puzzled expression. This was dangerous. This was the exact opposite of the life I had planned. Sarah had loved my hands. She'd said they were the hands of a poet. Then she'd use them to hold me down with her words, her moods, her endless, draining needs, until I felt like I was nothing more than an extension of her. Maya wasn't like that. Maya didn't seem to need anything from me. She just was. A solid, warm presence in my life, asking for nothing but a place to sleep, and in return, unknowingly dismantling every defense I had. The more I observed her, the more I realized that my carefully constructed walls weren't just keeping the world out. They were keeping me in. And Maya, with her wildflowers and her misplaced coffee mugs and her infuriatingly beautiful hands, was slowly, patiently, taking them down brick by brick. The third night of Maya's residency was suffocatingly quiet. A thick, oppressive humidity had settled over the city, a prelude to a storm that refused to break. We had eaten dinner in near silence, the air too heavy for small talk. Now we sat in the living room, the only light coming from a single lamp that cast long, dancing shadows on the walls. The television was off. The only sound was the distant rumble of thunder and the rustle of pages as Maya flipped through a large art book. I was pretending to read, but the words on the page were a meaningless jumble. My awareness was entirely focused on her, a magnetic pull I was powerless to resist. She was curled at the other end of the couch, tucked under the throw blanket, her bare feet peeking out. The sight of her painted toenails, a chipped and cheerful coral, felt impossibly intimate. "So," she said, her voice startlingly loud in the stillness. She closed the book with a soft thud. "This guy from the gallery, James, asked me out." My blood went cold. It was a ridiculous, nonsensical reaction. Maya was a beautiful single woman. Of course, men asked her out. It had nothing to do with me, and yet the words landed like a punch to the gut. An acidic mix of jealousy and something that felt horribly like possessiveness churned inside me. "Oh," I said, proud of how neutral my voice sounded. "That's nice." "Is it?" She looked at me, her expression unreadable in the dim light. "He's nice, he's handsome, he looks like a cartoon prince. I feel like I should be excited." "But you're not." It wasn't a question. She shook her head, worrying her lower lip with her teeth. "I don't know. The idea of it, the first date chatter, the trying to figure each other out, the kiss." She shuddered theatrically. "The whole performance of it all just seems exhausting." The word kiss hung in the air between us, thick and heavy as the storm-laden humidity. I thought of her lips, of the faint taste of coffee I sometimes caught on her breath. I thought of the cartoon prince, James, and a wave of pure, unadulterated rage washed over me. "Maybe you're just not ready to date," I offered, the words feeling like a lie. "Maybe," she agreed, but she was still watching me, her gaze intense. "Or maybe I'm just tired of dating the wrong people." She paused. "Sarah was the wrong person for you, you know?" The sudden shift in topic was like a slap. My shields went up instantly. "We're not talking about Sarah." "We never talk about Sarah," Maya said, her voice gentle but firm. "Which is why she's still sitting here on the couch between us. She's taking up all the room." I flinched. "That's not true." "Chloe," she leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "She didn't just break your heart. She convinced you that your heart wasn't worth having. She took your love for women, your love for a woman, and twisted it into something shameful, a weakness she could use against you. Every time you flinch when I get close, every time you retreat into this cold, perfect little box, you're letting her win." Tears pricked at the back of my eyes. Hot, angry, humiliated tears. I hated her for seeing it. I hated her for saying it out loud. And I hated her for being right. The end with Sarah hadn't been a sad mutual parting. It had been a brutal campaign of psychological warfare. She'd weaponized my sensitivity, my queerness, my deep-seated desire to please the woman I loved. She'd called my love suffocating in one breath and accused me of being emotionally distant in the next. She'd made me feel that my very identity as a woman who loved women was the root of all our problems, a fatal flaw in my character. The breakup wasn't just a loss. It was an indictment. "You don't know anything about it," I whispered, the words tasting like ash. "I know what I see," she replied, her voice impossibly soft. "I see my best friend, who is one of the warmest, most passionate people I've ever met, pretending to be an iceberg because one person was careless enough to crash into her." A tear escaped, tracing a hot path down my cheek. I wiped it away furiously. It was the first time I had cried about Sarah in front of anyone. It was a crack in the dam, a small leak, but the pressure behind it was immense. I didn't say anything else. I didn't have to. I just sat there, my fists clenched in my lap, and let the truth of her words wash over me. The storm finally broke outside, the first heavy drops of rain spattering against the window pane. Inside my apartment, in the suffocating quiet, a different kind of storm was just beginning. And for the first time, I felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was a terrifying, fragile thing, but it felt a little like hope. The rain continued for 2 solid days, trapping us in the apartment. The city outside my window was a blur of gray, the sound of the downpour a constant, soothing white noise. The tension that had snapped between us during the storm had settled into something new, something softer. My confession, or rather, my silent, tearful acquiescence to her words, had changed the emotional architecture of the space we shared. The wall between us was still there, but it was lower now, riddled with cracks. I could see her more clearly through it. She didn't press me for more details about Sarah. Instead, she gave me space, but it was an active, intentional kind of space. She'd make us both tea and leave my mug on the coffee table without a word. She'd put on music, a playlist of soulful, melancholic folk singers that seemed to understand the exact shape of my bruised heart. We existed in a comfortable silence, a shared quiet that was healing rather than empty. On the second rainy afternoon, I found her sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by lumps of clay she must have brought in her oversized bag. She had spread a canvas drop cloth over my pristine rug and was working intently on a small, misshapen lump, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her hands, those hands I couldn't stop watching, were covered in the wet gray slip. They moved with a mesmerizing combination of strength and delicacy, pinching, smoothing, and shaping the formless mass into something that was beginning to resemble a human figure. I sat on the couch, pulling my knees to my chest, and just watched her. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't seem to notice me at first. I watched the play of muscles in her forearms, the way she bit her lip when a piece wasn't cooperating. She wasn't just making an object. She was breathing life into it. There was a reverence in her touch, a deep, abiding love for the simple, messy act of creation. "It's ugly," she said suddenly, without looking up. I didn't say anything, I replied, startled. "You were thinking it. It's okay, it's supposed to be ugly at first." She looked up at me then, a smudge of clay on her forehead. Her eyes were bright, alive with passion. "You have to be willing to let it be a mess. You have to get your hands dirty. You can't be afraid of the imperfections because that's where the interesting stuff happens. You just trust the process." The words landed with an unnerving accuracy, a perfect metaphor for the mess inside my own chest. I had been so afraid of the imperfections, so terrified of getting my hands dirty again, that I had refused the process altogether. She must have seen the flicker of understanding in my eyes, because her expression softened. "It's about vulnerability," she said, her voice dropping a little. "This little guy," she gestured to the clay figure, "is completely at my mercy. But I have to be at its mercy too. I can't force it to be something it's not. I have to listen to what it wants to become." She fell silent, her attention returning to her work. But the conversation hung in the air. She was talking about clay, but she was also talking about me. She was telling me, in her own indirect way, that she understood, that she saw my fear of being shaped and broken. Later that evening, as she was cleaning up, she told me about her own fear, about the first time she'd submitted her work to a gallery, the terror of putting a piece of her soul on a white pedestal to be judged by strangers. "I felt completely naked," she confessed, her back to me as she washed the clay from her hands at the kitchen sink. "I thought, if they hate this, they hate me. It took me years to understand that my worth as an artist, as a person, isn't determined by whether or not someone wants to buy my work. It's in the making of it. It's in the courage it takes to just make the thing. She turned off the water and dried her hands, then faced me, leaning back against the counter. "We all have our galleries, I guess," she said softly. "The places where we feel judged, the relationships that make us feel like we're not enough." It was a gift. She was matching my sliver of vulnerability with a piece of her own. She wasn't trying to fix me or save me. She was simply sitting with me in the wreckage, showing me her own scars. In that moment, the last of my anger toward her for seeing me so clearly dissolved, replaced by a profound, aching gratitude. The distance between us on the couch suddenly felt vast. I had an almost overwhelming urge to move closer, to bridge the gap, to feel the warmth of her shoulder against mine. But I stayed put, paralyzed by a habit of fear that was years in the making. Still, for the first time in a very long time, I felt a genuine desire to be brave. The rain finally stopped on the 5th day. It left the city washed clean, the air crisp and smelling of wet pavement and new leaves. The change in atmosphere felt symbolic, a reflection of the shift that had occurred within the four walls of my apartment. The air between Maya and me was no longer heavy with unspoken things. It was light, charged with a different kind of energy, a nervous, hopeful anticipation that hummed just beneath the surface of our conversations. That evening, she insisted on celebrating the end of the rain. "We need to cook something celebratory," she declared, pulling ingredients out of my sparsely populated fridge with the confidence of a magician. "Something that isn't pasta or toast." We ended up in the kitchen, a space far too small for two people to navigate without constantly bumping into each other. It became an unchoreographed dance of near touches and soft collisions. Her hip would brush against mine as she reached for the olive oil. My arm would graze her back as I tried to get a plate from the cupboard above her head. Each point of contact was electric, a tiny explosion on my skin that left a phantom warmth in its wake. I was hyper-aware of her proximity, of the scent of her skin, of the sound of her breathing. My own breath felt shallow, trapped in my chest. At one point, she was trying to get a stubborn lid off a jar of olives. "Ugh, this thing is sealed for eternity," she grumbled, her hands slipping on the smooth glass. "Here, let me," I said, stepping closer. I took the jar from her. My fingers brushed against hers, and we both froze for a beat too long. The world seemed to slow down, the sounds of the kitchen fading into a dull hum. All I could hear was the frantic pounding of my own heart. I was standing so close to her. I could see the flecks of gold in her dark brown eyes. I could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin beneath the sandalwood and turpentine. Her gaze dropped to my mouth, then flickered back up to meet my eyes. The air crackled. This was it, the moment I had been simultaneously dreading and longing for all week. The air was thick with possibility, a question hanging between us that had nothing to do with olives. My mind was screaming at me to pull back, to make a joke, to shatter the intensity of the moment. "This is how it starts," the voice of my fear whispered. "This is the first step off the cliff." But my body wouldn't obey. I was rooted to the spot, caught in the gravity of her gaze. I saw her throat move as she swallowed. I saw her lips part slightly. It would be so easy. All I had to do was lean in, just a few inches. A timer on the oven went off, a shrill, piercing beep that shattered the spell. We both jumped back as if electrocuted. The the garlic bread," I stammered, turning away from her, my face burning. I fumbled with the oven mitts, my hands shaking. "Right," she said, her voice sounding unnaturally high. "Bread." I pulled the tray out of the oven, the wave of heat a welcome distraction. We didn't speak again until we sat down to eat. The food was delicious, but I barely tasted it. The almost moment hung between us, a ghost at the table. We had stepped right up to the edge of a precipice and then scrambled back at the last second. But we both knew it was there. And we both knew that sooner or later one of us was going to have to be brave enough to look down. The charged silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the deafening sound of what we weren't saying. Every shared glance, every accidental touch, was now imbued with a new and terrifying significance. My safe, sterile world had been irrevocably compromised. It was alive with feeling, and I had no idea what to do with it. The final 2 days of Maya's stay were an exercise in exquisite torture. The memory of our almost moment in the kitchen replayed in my mind on a continuous loop. Every interaction was freighted with a new, unbearable weight. When she passed me the salt at dinner, our fingers brushing for a fraction of a second, my entire nervous system lit up. When I woke in the night to get a glass of water and found her asleep on the couch, one arm flung over her head in a gesture of complete surrender. A wave of tenderness so fierce it felt like grief washed over me. I wanted to pull the throw blanket up over her shoulder. I wanted to smooth the hair back from her forehead. I wanted to sit on the floor and watch her breathe until morning. I did none of these things. I retreated to my room, my heart a frantic bird trapped in my ribs, and cursed her for making me feel again. My internal monologue became a relentless, churning storm. One part of me, the rational wounded part, screamed warnings. Remember Sarah. Remember the pain. This is a mistake. She's your best friend. You will ruin everything. But another part, a part I thought had died long ago, whispered back with a dangerous, seductive softness. But what if you don't? What if this is different? What if she's the one who won't leave? I was consumed by her. The dissertation lay forgotten on my desk. The ghosts of 19th century poets couldn't compete with the vibrant, overwhelming presence of the woman sleeping on my couch. I was terrified, not of Maya, but of the person I was becoming around her, someone who was starting to want things again. On her last night, the night before the plumber was scheduled to perform his final miracle on her pipes, the tension reached its breaking point. We were avoiding each other, moving around the small apartment like magnets with the same polarity, creating a buffer of empty space. The silence was louder than any argument. It was a silence filled with yearning, with fear, with the unspoken question that had been hanging between us for days. Finally, she cornered me. I was standing by the window, staring down at the streetlights, pretending to be fascinated by the late-night traffic. "So my landlord called," she said, her voice quiet behind me. "Everything's fixed. I can go home tomorrow." "That's great," I said, my voice brittle. I didn't turn around. I couldn't bear to look at her. The thought of this apartment returning to its previous state of silent, sterile order was suddenly unbearable. The silence wouldn't be peaceful anymore. It would just be empty. It would be a Maya-shaped void. "Is it?" she asked. I squeezed my eyes shut. "Yes, you can get back to your studio. I can get back to my work." "Chloe," her voice was closer now. I felt her presence behind me, a warmth that prickled my skin. "Look at me." Slowly, I turned. She was standing only a few feet away, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression a mixture of frustration and a deep, soul-wrenching sadness. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "This, not talking, not looking at each other. I feel like I'm losing my mind. And I feel like I'm losing you." "You're not losing me," I whispered. "Aren't I?" She took a step closer. "I'm right here, and you're a million miles away. You're so terrified of getting hurt that you won't even let yourself feel anything good. Is that how you want to live?" "It's safer," I said, the words a pathetic defense. "It's not living," she countered, her voice fierce. "It's waiting to die." She took another step, closing the space between us. She reached out, her hand hovering in the air for a moment before she gently cupped my jaw. Her thumbs stroked my cheek, a feather-light touch that sent a shiver through my entire body. "I'm not her, Chloe. I'm not Sarah." Her eyes searched mine, and in their depths, I saw everything I had been so desperate for and so terrified of finding: affection, understanding, and an unwavering, patient love. It was all there. It had probably been there for years, and I had just been too blind, too broken, to see it. All my defenses crumbled at once, washed away by the simple, profound truth of her touch. "I know," I breathed, and then, before I could lose my nerve, I closed the remaining distance between us and kissed her. It wasn't a tentative, questioning kiss. It was a kiss of desperation and relief, of a week of unbearable tension, and years of unspoken affection finally breaking free. Her lips were soft, yielding, and they tasted of coffee and the mint tea she'd been drinking. My hands came up to tangle in her messy curls, pulling her closer, trying to erase any remaining space between us. Her arms wrapped around my waist, holding me tight, holding me together. It was nothing like kissing Sarah, which had always felt like a performance, a transaction. This felt like coming home. It felt like breathing after being underwater for a very, very long time. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. We rested our foreheads together, our chests rising and falling in unison. The silence that fell wasn't tense or awkward. It was a silence of reverence, of awe at what had just passed between us. "So," she whispered, a shaky laugh in her voice, "that whole thing with James the cartoon prince, was that real?" I asked, my heart still hammering. She pulled back just enough to look me in the eye, a sheepish, beautiful smile playing on her lips. "It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to get you to react, to feel something, anything. I was going to cancel. I think I made him up mostly." I let out a laugh that was half a sob. All this time I had been the one hiding, the one building walls, while she had been patiently, bravely, trying to find a way in. "Well," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "it worked." I kissed her again, more slowly this time, with more tenderness and less desperation. It was a kiss of confirmation, a promise. In the quiet of my little apartment, with the sounds of the city humming below, I was finally letting go of the ghost that had haunted me. I was choosing the warm, living, breathing woman in my arms. I was choosing to get my hands dirty. I was choosing the messy, beautiful, terrifying process of starting again. We ended up on the couch, tangled together under the throw blanket. We didn't talk much more. There would be time for words later. For now, it was enough to just be close, to rediscover each other through touch. I traced the line of her jaw, the curve of her collarbone, committing the feel of her to memory. She played with a strand of my hair, her fingers gentle, her expressions soft and full of a wonder that mirrored my own. "That," I murmured into the quiet space between us, my head resting on her shoulder, "didn't feel like practice." She let out a soft huff of laughter, the sound vibrating through her chest and into mine. "No," she agreed, her voice a low, contented hum. "It really, really didn't." Her hand found mine, our fingers lacing together. It felt so natural, so right, that it was hard to believe it hadn't always been this way. In the space of a week, my apartment had transformed from a sterile waiting room into a home. And my heart, which I had believed to be shattered beyond repair, felt like it was slowly, carefully, being pieced back together. Not by me, but by the steady, patient hands of the woman beside me. There were still so many unknowns, so many fears lurking in the shadows, but for the first time in a very long time, they didn't seem so powerful. They were just shadows, and Maya was a steady, brilliant light, The next morning, I woke up to the smell of coffee and the feeling of being completely, utterly safe. I was in my own bed, and Maya was curled up beside me, her back to me, her dark hair a wild tumble on my pillow. The sun was streaming through the blinds, striping the bed in gold. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a harsh, intrusive sound. I glanced at the screen. The name flashing there was Sarah. A year ago, that name would have sent a spike of pure adrenaline and dread through me. My stomach would have clenched, my hands would have started to shake. I would have answered, ready to be pulled back into the vortex of her drama. Now, I just looked at her name. Then, I looked at the woman sleeping peacefully beside me, at the gentle rise and fall of her shoulders with each breath. Maya stirred, murmuring something in her sleep. Without a second thought, I reached over and pressed the decline button, then switched the phone to silent and set it face down. It was a small act, but it felt monumental. It was a choice, a concrete, definitive severing of the past. I slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen to make coffee. A few minutes later, Maya appeared in the doorway, rubbing the sleep from her eyes. She was wearing my old, ridiculously large t-shirt, and she had never looked more beautiful. "Hey," she said, her voice husky. "Hey," I replied, my heart doing that stupid little flip again. I handed her a mug. I silenced my phone. She took the mug, her eyes searching mine. She understood the unspoken significance of the statement. A slow, beautiful smile spread across her face. Good. We stood there for a moment, just drinking our coffee, the morning light filling the small kitchen. It was simple. It was quiet. It was everything I had been missing. The future was a blank page, and for the first time that didn't feel terrifying. It felt like an invitation. Isn't it strange how the one person who can truly heal you is sometimes the one who has been there all along, just waiting for you to be brave enough to see them? If you've ever had to make that choice between the safety of loneliness and the terrifying hope of a new beginning, let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like this story and subscribe for more.